Hi, my name is Steve Shaner, and I have a confession to make today. I am a storyteller. Now, by storyteller, I don't mean that I'm a big fat liar. What I really mean is I love stories. Oh, I may be short, and I may be fat, and I may have told a few whoppers along the way in my life, but for the most part, I'm not a liar, nor that kind of storyteller. But I love storytelling. I love to read, I love to watch, I love to listen to other people's stories. But what amazes me most about storytelling now that I hear it is how two different people can come away with different conclusions and a different take on that story than what I did. I don't understand that. Why doesn't everybody agree with me? When Jesus told stories, and by the way, he was the greatest storyteller in the world, it was often a story right out of the daily life of his audience. He used familiar scenes, people, places, activities, so that they could relate to what he was saying. The word pictures he drew were so simple. The simplicity of it all was really what attracted a lot of people to Jesus for him to tell stories. I want to read to you a story today out of the book of Matthew, chapter 13, a story that's very familiar to most people called the parable of the sower. It starts in verse 3. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered away because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times more than what was sown. And then he says this, he who has ears, let him hear. I wonder what he meant by that. Maybe we can come back to that. As you recount through this story, and you can start to look at it deeper and deeper and come up with all sorts of other things. But one of the things you'll have to notice is there are probably just a few basic parts that you need to remember. First of all, there was a sower. I think in this case, he meant the farmer. There was obviously the seed. Theologians, preachers, ministers, pastors, anybody has no difference in the fact that this must be the word of God or the message that he was trying to give. That's what he's calling the seed here. Then there's the wayside soil. Maybe that was the soil that was traveled road or beaten down, packed down by many people who were traveling on the road. He referred to the rocky soil, the ones that was full of rocks and other things that was going to keep that seed from producing well. He talked about the thorny ground, that where the thorns and the other weeds came up and just choked the life out of this new soil. And then he says again, he who has ears, let him hear. You know, for many years, I was a professor of mass communication at a university, and I taught a basic communication principles class. One of the great lessons in that course, and is in probably every mass communication principles of communication class, is the fact that there's a big difference between hearing and listening. And I think that's what Jesus is saying here. Let somebody who has ears to hear actually listen and understand what is being said. Okay, so the meaning of all these things that we can talk about, Jesus talked about all those things many times. In Mark chapter 4, verse 24, Jesus said, pay attention to what you hear. The measure you will be given will be the measure you get, and still more will be given to you. The Apostle Paul said something very similar. See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elements, spirits of the universe. Guard yourselves, because that is not according to Christ. I think what those people are saying here, Jesus and the Apostle Paul, is that just because you hear something uttered doesn't necessarily mean it's true. We have to be discerning of that kind of message in our lives. So as we look about and hear something, we need to understand that God has done his part in this. He has delivered us a message that's clear and succinct and can be understood by almost anybody who's of normal intelligence. And I'm assuming because you're listening to this video that includes you. You see, We have to understand that the message that he gave us is for our benefit, for us to find salvation, for us to have peace in our lives, for us to be able to know which way to go every day. But the real question is, are you hearing this message? Are you listening to the message? There's a difference. You can hear all the noise in the world, but when you listen, according to my class that I had, is when you actually take in what you hear, process it, and discern what is right, so that you can then turn around and say something back to somebody, and you actually have a conversation. Jesus wants to have a conversation with us as we hear his word, and he tells us how to live every day. He finds ways to relate to us so that we can be great listeners and not just hearers of the word.